What is your anxiety telling you? I'm going to analyse times I've had anxiety to try and figure out what it's telling me. So, when you're in those situations when anxiety kicks in, have you ever tried just actually listening to it and thinking, why is this happening right now? Because for me, a lot of the times when I'm faced with anxiety, it's almost like all I'm trying to do is wrestle with the feeling, like try and escape the feeling. But what if you give space for anxiety to be there and to allow it to be part of how you're feeling instead of trying to fight it? That is how I've always initially reacted to anxiety. It's like trying to put out a fire, like you get your hose out and that's your methods of trying to extinguish the anxiety, the fire of anxiety from your body. Whereas we're sort of allowing the fire to burn itself down. That's the way I'm thinking of it at the moment. So the most recent time I felt anxiety was I was asked to film an event, and I would typically get another team member to come and film it with me. So then there's two of us. There's someone to talk to, someone to bounce ideas off, ideas of where to place like the cameras for the event, and then that way I know both the cameras are like manned, so if the battery runs out or I need to stop and start recording or anything like that, there's someone there to solve that problem. Whereas this time I went in solo, and I was just the days leading up to the event, I was just running through all the potential problems in my head. So I'd be like, where am I going to put the camera? Do I have the correct sound equipment? And then I'd have the voice saying, I'm not prepared for this, I'm not prepared for this. And then that would just keep going until I did the event, really. And what was it telling me? Well, it was telling me I felt underprepared, but I also think it was telling me that I feel alone, I guess. It was telling me that I would feel safer if I had another team member there. And what about other times I've had anxiety? So a big time I get anxiety is during like a health scare. And then let's say I've got a new symptom or something, something I've never experienced before, and I'm like, oh my God, my first thought is I'm going to die, or oh my God, I've got this sort of disease or this cancer or something, because you Google it, everything sort of says you probably have cancer. So you freak out a little bit, or I do. And then what is the anxiety really saying in that moment? Well, it's saying you don't have control. It's saying you don't know what's going to happen. It's an unknown. It's saying you're not sure if you'll feel better. It is I would say that in that instance, the anxiety is saying it's a fear of the unknown. Now, what is anxiety saying to people who are sort of very anxious in public, or they feel very anxious around people? They feel very anxious just going through a short, like a common area, and then they want to isolate themselves. And that anxiety kicks in and you sort of lock up, you feel very tense. Well, in that instance, because I've experienced this, in that instance, I think the anxiety is telling me that I feel unsafe. It's saying we need to get somewhere where we feel comfortable and safe and get away from this danger. And now, maybe those anxieties are giving you good advice. Maybe they're not. So I think it's good to actually sit with the feeling sometimes and just think, why am I feeling this way? Because sometimes it's unnecessary. I would say a lot of the time it's unnecessary, because when you're allowing that fire to burn and rage in you of anxiety, it clouds your rational thinking. So maybe like when I said I've got like a sort of health scare and I've got a large amount of anxiety, when you actually think about it, how is that anxiety helping me in that moment? There's someone, I heard this quote once from someone, it was something along the lines of worrying is unnecessary suffering. If you're worrying about something, it's suffering twice, and it's needless suffering. Like, why? It's not providing you with anything, just worrying about something. Maybe initially it is telling you you're underprepared, you need to do this, and then as that fire grows, it just becomes unnecessary, and it's just consuming. Yeah, you're consumed by the fire of anxiety. Whereas I think what we need to do is, like we said, let the fire burn and let it burn itself down. Don't feed the fire. Don't try and put out the fire, but just let it naturally come down. Because, you know, often cases it is a valid feeling to feel anxious. It's trying to tell you something, because there's a reason we get anxious. It's trying to inform you of a danger, or that, you know, like you're underprepared or something, and that's why you've got to sit down and think about it. Like, why is this happening right now? Other times it might happen, I mean, for me, it would be out in public because of past experiences, like when I was younger, which I've said in previous videos, like a number of times I'd be going through the park, maybe with a group of friends, and then someone would start become quite aggressive towards me, and then when they would want to take my skateboard or take my friend's bike, and we were sort of victims, or I was definitely a victim, and I wouldn't stand up for myself or anything. And now when I go through town and that, if I see people who sort of look similar to the person who did this to me, I do get that feeling of unsafety, like an anxiety comes across me, and I would feel very sort of like I need to get out of here, and the anxiety is telling me you are not safe, let's go somewhere safe, just because of that past experience. And then if I actually sit with it in that moment and think rationally, I'm not unsafe in that moment, I'm just reliving a past experience. Another time I would feel anxious is when I'd go to a party. I would get anxiety quite a lot, and I've talked about this in a previous video when I talked about drinking. I would drink very quickly to try and get quite tipsy, to sort of that's getting the hose out and hosing down the fire, that is. And that's ignoring the reason why the fire started to begin with. You know, I'm not analysing what stokes that fire, what started it. And what started that fire, if I think about it, is that I just didn't feel like I'd belong in those situations, and I felt like I wasn't part of the friend group, as it were. And I felt out of place, and I felt like I would not be able to talk to people. So it was all fear, really. I was scared that, you know, I wouldn't, I don't know, maybe people wouldn't accept me for who I was, or I would say something and people would judge me. I believe that's what I was thinking. Yeah. This is quite a few years ago, because because of that anxiety, I don't really go to social events and that sort of thing, because it causes that anxiety. But am I just ignoring something that I should be tackling? I don't know. That's why it's good to sit down and think about these things. Another reason for anxiety would be if I did these videos in front of people. If I talked about my feelings like this and there was people who could hear what I was saying, in my vicinity, I would feel anxious. I would probably not want to talk. My lights are running out of battery. Yeah. Yeah, it would just cause me to sort of lock up, and I wouldn't say anything. So what is that anxiety saying? It's saying I'm afraid of people hearing what I've got to say, like hearing my true thoughts. And I guess I don't want to share these things in front of people, although it's sort of counterintuitive, whereas like I'm actually recording these and, like I keep saying, committing it to the SD card and uploading it to YouTube, where more people, even if it's just 20 views, if there was 20 people in front of me, I would feel anxious. I would sort of lock up, and I wouldn't be able to share my true feelings. Whereas doing it in this personal setting, I can. But it'd be nice to be able to not have that fear. I think working in a college has helped me gain some confidence, because, like I said, like in a social event, I would feel very like sort of anxious. And working in college has sort of forced me into those situations where I'm in I'll tell you an example. I was put in a space in the college where I've never worked before, and I go in and I've got to like hang out in the common room for an hour and then go to a brand new classroom. And the way I overcame feeling anxious, because I walked in there and I was like, my initial instinct is to, I can't talk to people, and it's to sort of just stand in the corner and not say anything. But what I did was I just started introducing myself to everyone one by one. I'd say, my name's Jake, and I have a lanyard. So I'd show them my lanyard. I'd say, what's your name? How are you doing? I'd initiate a bit of a conversation. And when I went round and talked to everyone, I felt so much better. And then I went into the classroom and I just, I'd go up to people and be like, do you need some help? Like, I'm always here. Like, just ask me if you need some help. And just initiating that conversation, saying who I am, asking how they're doing, talking to them a bit about their day, that helped tremendously. And that's taught me something that, just talk to people. Because, do you know what? It turns out, a lot of those students I'm talking to, they're very anxious. They might find it hard to talk to people. And just me introducing myself, that dispels the fear in them too. To be like, who is this guy that's in the classroom, this new person? They might feel the same, like I can't talk to them. Who knows what they think? That's a whole nother topic, like people's perceptions of you. But hopefully in that moment, I gave them a positive perception of me. Because if I just stood in the corner, didn't say anything, they would probably look at me and think, I don't want to talk to that guy. He seems so standoffish. And maybe they'd start seeing like my physical features as something to avoid. Like, oh, he looks, I don't know, he's got a beard, he looks evil or something. I just imagine it in this. But I could imagine that it could easily turn into that if you don't come across, and say hello straight away. Maybe they might see me as a friendly beard now. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like the perceptions would change and be very based on how they're feeling and looking at me in that moment, and that would stick with them. It's that initial impression. So I went out of my way to talk to everyone and say hello and greet them, and be as warm as I could. And I think, it worked. And I get on with a lot of the students there. And yeah, it's a very positive experience. And that's something I'd like to take forward into outside of work. Like, say, if there was a social gathering and I decide, okay, I'm going to this one, I would just go out my way to introduce myself and say hello. And that did, dispel a lot of the anxieties. It sort of made me feel like I did belong there. And I guess that's where I went wrong in the past. And these might be people I knew from school or college when I was actually a student. And there's no reason, or mutual friends, and there's no reason for me to feel like I'm out of place. They're probably some of the people I'd relate to the most because they were like a similar age to me, similar experiences. So having a conversation should be easier than at any other time in a way. So being so reserved and anxious and within myself was just doing a disservice. And I was using alcohol to tackle that, to hose down that fire. Whereas like now I'm analysing it, and like I said earlier, when I was in that common room, I had the fire there and I just let it burn itself out. I didn't feed it by standing in the corner. That would stoke the fire and make it worse. It would become a great raging fire if I did that. And I didn't hose it down by, what would I do? I don't know, by leaving. Instead I just let it burn and I talked to people and everything was fine. So I'd like to take that approach to other things in my life when I feel anxiety. Like, say, how could I use that in like a health scare setting? Well, it would be to, let's say I had a pain or something. It would be to just acknowledge the symptoms and talk to a doctor, really. Because panicking about... It's like when they say you get diagnosed with cancer. I know this is quite a big turn, but that diagnosis doesn't change anything in that moment, because if you've been diagnosed with it, you already had it. You just didn't know it. And those days before you even knew, you was probably happy, or like you weren't anxious about your health before that. Whereas now, just because someone's told you, now you're scared. I mean, I would be scared if I had it. But what I'm trying to say is it didn't change who you are in that moment. You're still the same person. Yes, you now you know that you have cancer, but before that you had cancer, but you just didn't know it. So I would say the best approach would be, yes, it would be a shock, and I would be scared, but it'd be, you have to just accept it, don't you? And then try and think logically, what do I do next? What treatments do I do? What approaches to life can I change to give myself the best chance of a positive outcome from this? I think that's how I would try and look at it. I understand that, it'd be a terrifying thing, but I'm just saying, like, worst case scenario, because that would be sort of like the ultimate anxiety, I would say. That's something as someone with inflammatory bowel disease, they say I've got a greater risk of like bowel cancer. So it is something in the back of my mind, sort of. I don't think about it a lot, but it's one of those things I did think about a lot when I was first diagnosed. Was, what's the ultimate outcome of this? And maybe one day I will be diagnosed with cancer, I don't know. But I hope that I would take the approach that I took in college. Let the fire of anxiety burn itself out and then try and just face the reality. Just accept what's going on. Because worrying about it doesn't change your situation. If anything, it makes your situation worse because you're just stressed, and stress causes so many more problems. You just need to accept who you are and what's wrong with you. We're not all lucky. I'd say a lot of us are unlucky. Like, a lot of us have problems. Yeah, and this is something I learned through going to therapy. She said a lot of it is just accepting your situation. Like, I was taught this by my therapist when I was going through my sleep deprivation, when I was on some steroid medication to reduce the inflammation inside of me. So I was in a very bad state, and she was trying to tell me about, just accept what's going on. The best thing you can do is just sit with the feeling and accept this is what is, the situation you're in. There's nothing you can do right now to change it, but just accept it and think about how you're going to move forward. And I think, over time, that's slowly internalized for me. It's weird because she told me this, maybe a year ago, and I still think about it now. So, as a side tangent, therapy, worth it. I do think it's worth it because you learn some lessons, and it might be a lesson that in the moment you might think, I can't be bothered to hear this. Or it might be something you think that you're not going to care about, but it sticks in there and you think about it. And then, like me, a year later, you start to agree, and those ideas become very relevant. So it's almost like you get given some tools. Yeah. I mean, that's about it, really. I hope what I've said helps some people. Anxiety is quite a big sort of issue for a lot of people. So, and I've got, I've had a lot of it myself. Where I work in the college with students who sort of can be quite, they have high needs. I see anxiety a lot in them, in a lot of the students. And, it makes me want to try and help them because I have been there. I know what it feels like, and I know sort of how hard it can be. So that's why I just wanted to talk about it now, really. Yeah. I hope that helps. And if you liked it, please press subscribe because I'd love to know that some people are watching. Maybe give the video a like. I mean, some comments would be awesome. Yeah. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next video.